Thanks so much. So yes, we're going to be starting with IoT, New Opportunities for German Technology. And for everyone who is not sure what IoT is, actually, how many people don't know that term yet? Okay, so all of our companies are going to be fine. So we're talking about the Internet of Things, and I'd like to invite my three amazing panelists up to the stage to join me right now. Axel, Josef, and Christian. So to give a bit of background, I read recently actually an article in Business Insider that said that by 2020 we're going to be looking at 34 billion devices connected to the internet. And that's not only smart devices like we will see today perhaps, but also cell phones, also thinking about things in the business space, in the government space. So this is a huge, huge topic right now. And we're going to be discussing that. I'm going to pass this over to my three panelists to tell us a bit about themselves and what they're doing. So yes.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Josef. I'm the CEO of relayr. We are a IoT middleware company for the industrial Internet of Things. So we primarily work with, hidden champions here in Germany, large industrial players, insurance companies, and very excited to be part of the journey and looking forward to the discussion here.
Yeah, hi, I'm Chris. I'm one of the founders and CEO of Tado. Tado is also an Internet of Things company taking care of your heating system at home, basically making it more efficient and more comfortable for our users. And our vision is that in the future, every home will have a smart heating and air conditioning, and that's what we're working on, very passionate day in and day out.
Hi, and I'm Axel. I'm with Hubraum. Hubraum is the bridge, the interface of Deutsche Telekom to the young startup ecosystem. And Deutsche Telekom is also an IoT company to me because IoT is very much about connectivity, and our vision is to provide global connectivity to the IoT world.
Thanks so much for being here. So since this is specifically about looking at opportunities with respect to the German market, can you guys tell us a little bit more about how you came to be based in Germany? Has this been your core market? Or are you also looking globally? Maybe specifically for Josef and Chris?
Yeah. Should I start? Yeah, so we clearly see us as a global company, right? So we started off in Germany, actually here in Berlin. And the reason why we started here was primarily because of the GDP impact that IoT has to Germany. If you look at our GDP today and the contribution from large industrial companies, then it's pretty significant. And IoT, or digital transformation, to be more precise, to these customers has a very significant positive or negative impact, right? So if they manage the transformation well and establish new revenue streams, become more of services companies, then they will be in great shape, and subsequently Germany will be in great shape. If they don't manage that transformation, then not only do we have a problem with these companies, but also as a country, we will face some problems. So it's a core market for us. We also have engineering here. But we expanded throughout Europe fairly quickly. We have offices in Boston and also Menlo Park, and we will be expanding to Asia towards the end of the year. And we see different drivers in these different markets. But I would say we are a global company that is very US driven when it comes to marketing and sales, but from a technology perspective, we fundamentally believe in German engineering and have our engineering headquarters here.
And the same for you, Chris, or totally different?
Yeah, maybe we didn't approach it so analytically. So basically, we were convinced about the problem we were solving, and me and my co-founders, we built the first prototypes, and of course, where we installed it first was our own apartments and homes, and then the homes of our families and friends. So and we were based in Munich, so we were living there. So basically, kind of naturally, we started in Munich in Germany, and then we expanded into other countries. So we're currently operating in 14 countries, fully localized with on-the-ground support, language support, and so on. And how we approach our expansion is that we basically just try to sense where customer demand and customer pull is coming from. So after we got some decent amount of users in in Germany, we realized that the strongest pull, basically, besides Germany, comes from the UK. So then we went into the UK, and as a third country, it was basically Italy. Then it was the Benelux, and then, for example, for our air conditioning product, we started a Kickstarter campaign, basically with the goal to see where globally the demand is coming from. So we tried to set up the campaign pretty globally. So the video which we did in Bangkok to give it some Asian touch. But we also did lots of PR in the US to try to tackle it globally and see where the demand is coming from. And from the Kickstarter campaign, actually the like 2/3 of our backers came from the US. And then Singapore and Hong Kong were also quite strong in terms of demand. So that's basically how we tackle international expansion, going after the customer who wants to have what we are building, and then of course also adapting the products.
Very interesting. And Axel, for you, for the companies that you're working with, how are they tackling things like global expansion? Or are they primarily German, growing from here?
So, well, our perspective is a bit different because we follow our customers, and it's pretty clear that if you're thinking of, let me say, connected car, you cannot work with a German car manufacturer and tell them, yeah, well, I will be your connectivity provider for your connected cars, but for Germany only. And then they say, yeah, well, but I'm selling my cars worldwide. So there is no alternative of being global from the very first beginning, which also means that companies we want to work with need to have the global impact in mind. And the second aspect, looking more at the, let me say, consumer markets, there we have like very much also these data-driven models. And if you think about data-driven models, then you need to think from the very first beginning about scale of data, because even only if you have the amount of data needed, then you can create these data-driven business models. So you need to be international as well from the very first beginning, yeah, and have that in mind, built in your product.
And so just to clarify for all three of you, like, what do you think is the central way that, or the central reason to stay in Germany or to continue to, I guess, headquarter here when, you stated probably the majority of your market in the IoT space is going to be somewhere else. So why do you stay here?
Well, so for us specifically, the customer base is pretty significant, right? So Germany alone has 2,000 what we call hidden champions, like global market in a specific, vertical market. You probably don't know these companies. We didn't know them either, right? But they own that like 80 or 90% of that market. So for us, that's a critically important market, also from a sales perspective, right? So we never really thought about leaving Germany, right? But there's a couple of things from a cultural perspective that make it, tough doing business here, right? The Germans are very conservative. They're not, necessarily leaning forward. They're not aggressive salespeople. And I'm a fundamental believer, whether for my own companies or companies that I invest in, that it's never the best technology that wins, which is, a very disrupting idea for Germany. But it's never the best technology that wins. It's always the best sales team that wins. And if you look at the global tech companies, they prove it day in and day out. Like Cisco, is a great company, but they never have, leading edge technology products. They have a great combination of, be a customer-centric company, care about the customers, be very aggressive in sales, and have a technology that is good enough, right? And that's not necessarily our approach. That's the reason why we have engineering here. We want to have a combination of an A product and an A sales team. But I think the world is so global that it doesn't necessarily matter where you are, right? I think that's certainly a learning that we see.
And why are you still here?
So actually, when it comes to controlling heating and air conditioning systems, Germany is worldwide the toughest country in terms of making the product compatible to heating and air conditioning systems, because there are so many different interfaces which are a lot easier in other places around the world. So basically we started from the hardest market, where actually right now we don't have any competitor being able to serve heating systems across different manufacturers. So in Germany, we're the only one who's capable of doing it. When it comes to other European countries, we do have competitors, and also, of course, in the US. But they are far inferior in terms of technology, not only on the compatibility side, but also the more complex interfaces which we have developed enable more data streams, to be able to analyze more data streams like fault codes, to be able to modulate heating systems, where our competitors cannot do that. So we're basically, since we started in the hardest environment, we have built a very solid technology, and of course it's not only about the very solid technology, it's also about scaling sales, but our basically competitive advantage in Europe is much stronger than in the US, and that's why our focus is on Europe and based here out of Germany, where we have good engineers, where we are in the most complex environment to build the best possible products and scale it into the world.
Interesting. So I'd actually like to maybe switch gears and start with you, Axel, even. What do you think are the challenges? I mean, we've kind of identified that obviously engineering talent, I mean, Germany has this legacy of incredible engineering talent. There's also a huge market here that's kind of easily then translated maybe to other European countries. But what do you think, what would you identify as the biggest challenge for IoT, whether that be from a scaling perspective or a product perspective?
So I think it's different if you talk about consumer or business markets. In consumer, I still have the feeling that it still looks too complex and it's too expensive to the customers. That's why I'm also really like what you are doing, because you have a very defined, very clear vertical use case. People know what they want to buy, they get it, and not like a huge full package with thousands of things that they don't need, which is very, very expensive. Same applies maybe for security. So I think that's one in the consumer market, that it's still too expensive and too complex because people are afraid of failing with technology. In the business markets, I think, or I have the feeling that we are at a turning point, because I was talking to some like German Mittelstand manufacturing companies, and they currently all are in fear of the Asian or Chinese invasion. So they, for the time being, Germany has been superior in designing machines and manufacturing technologies. But now they have to come to a next level of efficiency and productivity to be in front of, or stay in front of the Asian competitors. And that means digitalization and building new business models, and IoT is exactly what can enable them to make their machines more smarter and do the next step before the competition comes in with maybe lower prices, but not as good quality. Yeah.
And within that, then, what do you see as the barrier? It's really just that they need to outrun these Asian companies in order to sort of have that tipping point?
It may sound silly, but there was this head of innovation for a machine manufacturer, and he said, well, but my customers have so many different machines and they all have different protocols, and I don't know how to handle this. Yeah, so like very basic things. Then the second thing is like if we build in all these sensors, we're starting to offer data-based models, and of course, they want to own, the machine manufacturer wants to own the data and then offer like a data-driven business model, but customers are very afraid of giving away their data. So it's about like data security and who gets what out of this new part in the whole business model. Yeah. So these are things that keeps them away from being faster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll ask both of you, for your companies, what do you, I mean, either in the broad sense of, you know, the IoT scene in Germany, or particularly for your companies, what do you feel is the biggest barrier that you're kind of approaching right now?
I think it's building this new category. So, I mean, for example, the country where adoption is the furthest is Holland, the Netherlands, where 10% of all households have a smart thermostat. When it comes to UK, it's maybe 2 or 3%. In the US, it's 2 or 3%. In Germany, it's 0.3%. So it's basically the category is not there yet for what we are doing. So people don't know yet the benefits, and it has not become like the gold standard to have smart heating at home, and that's the main barrier we have to work on to really educate the user and build the category. On the technological side, I think it's if you bring the smart home onto one standard, would definitely speed up adoption. Like this is the protocol question. Maybe we don't go into detail, but that's the quintessence.
So we had discussed protocols as a big issue, that there's so many Wi-Fi, Zigbee, Z-Wave, Bluetooth, all of these that are then requiring sort of a central way to deal with those, which comes back to your complexity issue completely, just to give you some background. And what would you say that?
Yeah, so in the B2B world, I think the problem is all the moving parts, right? So you have software, you have analytics, you have gateway connectivity is a big topic. You have in millions of endpoints, right? The amount of data that we stream for our customers is just insanely high, right? So that all these different moving parts are creating complexity, and at the end of the day, the solutions needs to be simple. So a lot of the things that we do is around predictive maintenance and trying to get an understanding, help customers move away from condition-based maintenance to predictive maintenance, and bringing together all these different moving parts is a challenge. Security is a big challenge. The other one is a cultural change within the companies, right? So when we talk about European industrial companies, they're really good in building gear, right? Build an elevator, build a car, but they don't understand services, right? And as the world is moving away from being a CAPEX-centric world more to an OPEX world where it's more about services, and as services have higher margins, they have problems making that transition internally, and there's a lot of resistance internally. So that's another problem, and I think the last problem, which is a challenge, is the not invented here syndrome, right? So they, all these large industrial players always, were really focused on building great technology, but do it themselves and own the data. And IoT is about opening up and solutions where you connect to partners, to customers, and that's a cultural shift, which is very challenging, which means for us that we only engage with customers where we have C-level and board support, right? So we make this pretty clear from day one. It's also a reflection of the seniority needed in our sales teams, right? It's a very consultative-led approach that has, only little to do with technology, more about business impact, transformation. But if you manage the transformation, the impact for the customer is pretty big, and our bookings and revenues impact is pretty big too.
Yeah, it's a good thing to manage.
Yeah.
And I like to add to that, because I think this is a very important point, especially also for like family-owned German Mittelstand companies. They all have everything under control, and suddenly like the whole thing gets blurry, because the value chain is becoming a network of partners playing together, or even like a mixture of intelligent sensors that starts to do their own contracts, like ordering things and doing things without any person involved, and that scares them. Yeah, but that's exactly where they can get the most out of it, and that keeps them away to go into this area. They don't know that. Yeah, they're afraid of that.
Do you feel like you're already seeing sort of a shift with some of the Mittelstand companies beginning to see the value in that, or is it something we really need to, is still kind of a brick wall?
As I said, the pressure is there, and on the other hand, it's also more and more companies require from their suppliers that they become part of their digitalized value chain. So there is a pressure of building machines that are intelligent. There is a pressure of having logistics that can be synchronized with the digitalized logistics of the customer, and so on and so forth. So it comes step by step.
Yeah.
We see the same, right? I mean, the way that we qualify or pre-qualify specific vertical markets we go in or not go in is primarily driven by competitive pressure, right? So if good enough is good enough, they will not move, right? Why should they change? They need to feel customers going away and competitors attacking their customers with new services that they offer, right? So if you are a German Mittelstands company and this is like our sweet spot, if you will, then they're not making their margins on the machineries that they produce. They're making their margins on the maintenance, right? And there's a lot of similarities to, the old, telephone world when telephones moved to IP. In most of the incumbents didn't understand that this was not a wave, this was a tsunami, and that tsunami just killed them, right? Now, IP technology companies own that market entirely, right? And there's an additional, there's a trend going on like this in all of these vertical markets. So, and it's very binary. So we always tell our customers, your biggest competitors do nothing, right? Because as soon as you see somebody with a fully fledged service offering, a consumption-based model attacking your customers, you will not be able to catch up, right? You just close down, right? And that's something that more and more of these market leaders understand, and they want to be ahead of the curve, which is good. But others in very old industries, they don't necessarily get it, and it's also a question of generations, right? If you're like a 75-year-old, chairman of a family-owned business, you don't necessarily understand that trend and the speed of innovation, right? It's about failing fast, be very aggressive in sales. They have all these great attitudes from the past, which brought them to where they are today. But the world is changing so dramatically, which is impacting them so significantly, but they don't necessarily understand it.
Yeah, so they need somebody to help.
That's why we're here. Right?
Good, I'm glad.
Yeah.
And Chris, so I think that sort of explains it quite nicely from the B2B standpoint. So then from the B2C standpoint, what are you doing at Tado to educate your customers? I know we talked about there isn't really that category. And is it solely your responsibility as a company to do that, or are there other players in this that also need to be educating?
Of course, it's us and our competitors needing to build this category. There's nobody doing it for us, obviously. And our approach is basically to keep the message pretty simple. So basically saying, we save you energy. Tado tells you heating. When the last person has left the house, so it goes to a savings mode, and then the first person is coming back, it's warm and comfortable again. So basically that the customer understands, okay, great, I don't have to turn down my heating anymore. Tado does it for me automatically to save money. That's a good thing, I'll buy into it. And then we bring additional services on top of our spearhead product, which we brought into the customer. So basically on top of the data we have, so monitoring data from the heating system and the daily user interaction on the smartphone app, because the Tado app will never get boring. So a warm room will never get boring. You always want to adjust temperature. This is different to a game. So we will always have this user interaction. And then all of a sudden, when, for example, your heating breaks down, we send you a message, hey, your heating just stopped working because the pump broke and cost 180 euros to repair it. And here's an engineer in your area who can fix it for you right away. And you see a rating of the engineer, where he is, and he can directly book an appointment. So basically moving from the product into services, into the actual service industry. And this is, I think, the major shift that in the world of IoT, the hardware product is only 5% of the whole value you create, and 95% lies in the software and the apps and in the services. And in our company, 95% of our product developers are software developers, and 5% basically care about the hardware. When you go to a traditional hardware company, you have 95% hardware people, 5% software people. So for them, it's really, really hard to catch up with the new wave or the tsunami of IoT products and services, because once you have the customer and lock them in with the services as well, it's a very it's really difficult to get your customer back. And I think this the service connection is also a big barrier for like Asian companies, Asian hardware manufacturers coming into this market, because you have to make all the connections with the service suppliers, like like the installers who can repair a heating system, or the utility companies to do demand response and so on. So this is definitely a big competitive edge and lock-in also when you're in such a market.
Yeah. It's interesting that you bring up how much of IoT is actually still based around just software and not hardware, because when you think of things, you think of things. And it also brings it to an interesting place of, if we talk about investment within Germany for hardware specifically, I'd be curious to hear how you guys feel about how that develops, because there haven't been so many big investments in hardware companies, I would say, or hardware-driven companies. Do you feel like that needs to change, or is that not a problem because we're dealing with IoT companies that are going to be primarily software anyway? So maybe, Axel, we can start with you.
We have discussed a lot about this in our team, and hardware is a hard thing to do. It's very complex. If you are a hardware startup, it's very different to being a software startup. Yeah, you need to have people who really understand how to build this, and many teams just fail without having a single, let me say, prototype out there. So it's quite risky, at least in the first months, and it's very very different. Also, like in the to me, in the investment structure, because often hardware startups start with a Kickstarter campaign, which more or less is a kind of a let me say problem solution or market testing sometimes, and then starting to build, and then like going into a serious business, and that is, like, at least to us, a reason. Besides, we don't have the know-how in our team, and also like for Deutsche Telekom, we are not like a hardware manufacturer. Besides, like the much higher risk that we stay away from that. But if it works, it scales very very nicely, and then it's lots of fun. But for us, at least, it's a too hard thing. Yeah.
Understood. Or too hard so far. But for both relayr and for Tado, you had quite impressive rounds of financing in 2015, if I'm not mistaken, primarily from a US investor in the case of relayr, but also from German investors in the case of Tado. Could you guys talk about how that process went, why perhaps you didn't look within Germany, if it was coming from international money, or why you decided to stay in Germany?
Yeah, so for us, I mean, one of the advices that I always try to give to founders and to entrepreneurs is do heavy due diligence on your investors, right? I mean, they do due diligence because they have responsibility, to their LPs. But as a founder, you have to do due diligence on your VC, and the VC needs to, first of all, understand and buy into your strategy. That's number one. And the VC needs to be an asset. So deploying capital doesn't require a lot of knowledge, right? I mean, it's not very sophisticated, wiring money. But real VCs that bind to your strategy and come with an asset can make a significant impact to the journey. And as we figured out that this will be a very, very long journey for us that will require a lot of capital, which means we need a big fund. The second thing we identified was that we are changing an industry, right? Which is, it's really helpful if you have somebody on board that changed industries before, right? And in our case with Kleiner Perkins, they did it over 4 decades, right? They started Google and Amazon, and there's so much knowledge around, completely disrupting entire industries, right? And changing and destroying some industries, right? And there's so much knowledge that they have created, which is greatly beneficial to us. The other big difference is, and this also goes back to your hardware question, I guess, is they take some of the US strategic investors, they take a more systematic approach to solving a problem, right? So when you talk about the hardware, then it's typically, hardware, can be like a solution like this, or it can be a component play. And for European investors, a component play would never look very interesting and appealing. In the case of Kleiner, for example, as we have pretty good knowledge around this, they do, I would say, 30% of their hardware startups are stealth startups that never have a website, right? The new Apple Watch, for example, was a Kleiner startup that never ever had a website, right? That I think the acquisition wasn't even announced. And the way that they approach is they look at a phone, for example, say, okay, the phone is today it's a nightmare. We use components that were not originally designed to be deployed in phones. Most of the battery, is being deployed to heat up the display. That's all bullshit. So what do we have? What kind of components do we need to change that? And then they just start like 10 hardware companies, right? That approach different problems, and they see this more systematically. And then it comes together, and then you have a new, like a new evolution of chips, which you can then deploy while this world is transitioning towards a mobile world, right? And this long-term, very aggressive and very strategic thinking, I think, is more present in the US than in Europe, where we still think more about application solutions, quick trade sales, and not necessarily something that really changes entire industries, because it's much more risky, right?
Yeah. And Americans like risky stuff, usually.
Yeah.
But Chris, for you, so it was primarily target partners and a few others. For you must have aligned with a fund that could take you there and was willing to do that kind of thing. Did they not see it as a risk, or are they just like ready? Like what was the deal?
So in total we have raised 50 million euros for building the product, expanding it into the world, and building basically the leader in intelligent climate control. So this is our ambition, and we raised the capital from we started in Germany with target partners, as you said, and the follow-on rounds we did also within Europe, from different countries within Europe, but mainly because our core market is here. Germany is our biggest market, so it's, let's say, also easier to raise capital here than raising capital in the US without a strong US angle. So when you want to have capital from US investors, usually the question is, what's a US angle? Do you have an office here? What's your strategy? And unless you really have something solid there, you won't get big capital unless you have really good connections like Josef.
Great. So I think for the last few minutes, we'll actually open it up to the audience. We have time for 1 or 2 questions. Anybody have a burning question already about hardware, about investment, about anything? No? Come on, guys. Okay. Well, then I will ask one more. I'm curious if you think that actually, it's sort of known that there is perhaps less money for hardware in Germany. Do you think this is a problem moving forward? Do you think this is something that we actually have to build up to distinguish Germany as a leader in IoT? Or is it not? And why?
I think that all important products around us in our lives will become online products, and they will be connected to services, to the consumers with really strong customer relationships. And you can tackle this this whole industry, this IoT industry, from the hardware side, from the software side, from the services side, the different parts of the value chain which you can tackle there. So I think the whole space is definitely worth investing, and then you have to look at the different categories and how to do these investments there. If you start on the hardware layer, if you start on some service or some software layer. So it's difficult to answer in general. But I think to answer the question, I think IoT is worth investing.
Me too. That's a great point. Axel, for you, you said that it's both risky because often you cannot find a team that's able to really have knowledge base around the hardware side as well as the software side. Is that something that Hubraum is looking into developing, or do you see that as like a long-term goal or not?
No, for the reason just stated, knowledge, risky, and you have to have deep pockets because it's a much longer investment cycle, so to say, than if it's a software play. We stay away from that. But if you look at the strategy of Deutsche Telekom, which I think is very exciting to young startups, and that's also what we're doing at Hubraum together with Intel and Cisco, but also with other partners. Companies like Deutsche Telekom and others, and like you, like relayr, building like this horizontal platforms. But of course, no one will be able to build all these different vertical use cases for dedicated industries, dedicated industry problems. So there's so much room for innovation and to make business for you as startups, for you as entrepreneurs, that I really just can invite you to go into that space. And we even have not scratched the surface. If you think of like smart cities, what's to come there, a real smart home, connected driving, the whole health industry. Yeah, like there's multi-billion markets out there. So, but you have to think of also differently, not only like conquering the world all on your own, but thinking of small alliances. And in many areas, it makes sense to partner with a player like Deutsche or someone else who has this platform, this container that helps you to distribute your product. And therefore, I think it's very exciting. Yeah.
Definitely. So maybe we'll do one last question, or we're good? Is there, in the back? You can either come up or shout it out.
I do have a question for Axel. So if I just may I ask a question with regard to the B2C space. Mm-hmm. You mentioned software as a common denominator because interoperability of devices is obviously a problem. Can you foresee that maybe a developer community, and I guess, as I understand, Deutsche Telekom is using also Open Hub, or what Google is doing at the moment will wash out other business model like the ones Christian is trying to drive?
So once again, if you want
do you think that a common software denominator which solves the interoperability problem, like Open Hub is doing on IoT devices, or what Google is doing at the moment, that this will wipe out other business models which are currently being built?
Well, of course, there's always the question, how many standards will be out there, how many open, how many closed standards will be out there, and I can foresee such a situation that you're thinking of.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much to all of our panelists and the audience.